Cover something. Hadith Jibreel, right? So every week we're covering from the book called Al-Arba'in al-Nawawiyah, the 40 hadith collection of Imam al-Nawawi, right? Okay, so the first week we covered the hadith of intention. Which one is that? Anybody remember it? Yes, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Okay, we covered the whole hadith. The second week we covered the hadith of Jibreel, right? Where Jibreel alayhi came in the form of a man and asked 4 questions. What was Islam, what was Iman, what was Ihsan, and what were the signs of the Day of Judgment? Anybody remember those responses that Jibreel alayhi gave, that the Prophet gave to those questions? What was Islam? The 5 pillars, right? Yeah. Shahadat an la ilaha illallah wa Muhammadur Rasulullah, right? And then what was Iman? And tu'mina billahi wa malaikatihi wa kutubihi wa rusulihi, that you believe in Allah, the last day, and all of those things. And then he asked him about what is ihsan, and he said, أَن تَعْبُدَ اللَّهَ كَأَنَّكَ تَرَاهُ فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَاهُ فَإِنَّهُ يَرَاكَ, that you worship Allah as though you see Him, and if you don't see Him, then know that He sees you. And the 4th thing were the signs of the Day of Judgment. We mentioned 2 that Jibreel alayhi mentioned. What were those 2 signs?
That there will be tall towers.
That the Bedouin Arabs will be challenging or will be rivaling and building building tall buildings, and that's what we see now. And also that children will be very disrespectful to their mothers, and that will be prevalent in society, right? So that was the first week and the second week. And so this week, since we covered 2 hadith, what hadith are we going to cover? The 3rd one, right? Obviously. But before we cover the 3rd hadith this week, I want to go over a brief introduction as to who Imam al-Nawawi was. Imam al-Nawawi was a great scholar in the 631 Hijri. And in the Gregorian calendar, our calendar, we're in what year? 2021. We're in 2021. What year are we in, Suhaib? 2021, right? Okay, so Imam al-Nawawi was born in 1231. Okay? And Imam al-Nawawi, his name has become a household name. There have been many scholars in Islamic history, but Imam al-Nawawi's name is something that has become a household name. Almost every masjid has a book of his called Riyadh al-Salihin. And he is an umdah in the Shafi'i school of thought, right? That you can't have the Shafi'i madhab without Imam al-Nawawi. And his book now, Al-Arba'in al-Nawawiyah, is taught in almost every single masjid, in almost every single madrasa. It's the primer hadith book that usually every student starts with. Al-Arba'in al-Nawawiyah, the 40 hadith collection of Imam al-Nawawi. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made an acceptance for Imam al-Nawawi across the world in the Muslim Ummah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ سَيَجْعَلُ لَهُمُ الرَّحْمَنُ وُدًّا. That those that believe and do وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will create a love for them in the hearts of people. Will create a love for them in the hearts of people. We see people, famous figures now, that Muslim figures, that because of their iman and because of their actions, people just have a love for them. All people just end up having a love for them. I can think of one person right now off the top of my head, Habib, people call him Habib, but his name is Habib. Everyone loves him. Why? Because he has iman and he's doing such good things. And even historically, Muhammad Ali in the boxing world, right? I'm just saying this because these are athletes and you guys usually look up to athletes. Their names became household and people love them. Why? Because of their actions. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He loves someone and He sees the sincerity that they have, He will put a love for that person in the hearts of people. So that's what the case was for Imam al-Nawawi. Imam al-Nawawi's real name is Yahya ibn Sharaf. And his kunya is Abu Zakariya. Anybody know why his kunya is Abu Zakariya?
His what?
His kunya. His nickname. Like Sheikh is Abu Yazid. There's Abu Sharif.
Was he have some of his name Zakariya?
No. Close. But Imam al-Nawawi actually never got married. Imam al-Nawawi passed away before ever having to get married. He was called, in the Arab world, even if they don't have children, you guys know this better than I do, they have kunyas even before they have kids, and the reason he chose Abu Zakariya is because obviously, Ya Zakariya inna nubashiruka bi ghulamin ismuhu Yahya, right? So they always do that. So Hassan and Ali will be together, and Yahya and Zakariya will always be together. That's why he was known as Abu Zakariya, right? And so either a person will be given a kunya because of a child they have, or something that they're known for. Can you guys name me a sahabi that has a kunya because of a child that they had? I'll give you a hint. Ali,
Abu Salama.
Abu Salama? Okay, yeah, that's one. Okay, and also Ali, Abu Hassan, right? Ali is Abu Hassan. And give me an example of a person who had a kunya because of something they were known for. Abu Hurairah, right? He was known to be playing around with kittens, you know? Anybody know my kunya?
Me. Abu Dhar.
No. Abu Bakr, yeah, that's my kunya, you know, because I like to lift weights. Right? So, and is having a kunya an Islamic thing or is it a cultural thing? Huh?
Cultural.
There's disagreements, there's ikhtilaf between scholars. Some scholars say that it's actually an Islamic thing to have a kunya. Because the Prophet ﷺ, when people would come to him and they would have whenever they would have bad names, he would always change them. So people would sometimes come to the Prophet ﷺ and he would have bad nicknames, bad kunyas, and he would change that. And so the scholars would say that's proof that it's Islamic to have a good kunya. Right? So Imam al-Nawawi, unlike other scholars, he didn't come from a really high lineage. Or he didn't come from a lineage of scholars. You know, if you look at Ibn Taymiyyah, his grandfather was a scholar. If we look at Imam Bukhari, his father was a scholar of hadith, right? Imam al-Nawawi came from an average family. Imam al-Nawawi came from a family of merchants. You know what his father used to sell? His father used to sell fruits and vegetables. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wrote for Imam al-Nawawi to become so great because his father was very particular about not taking anything from a haram source. That his kasb would be completely 100% halal. And because of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put barakah in the ilm of Imam al-Nawawi. Right? And Allah, as we know the ayat, Ya ayyuha rasulu kulu min at-tayyibat. And just like that, for us we're commanded, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu kulu min tayyibati ma razaqnakum. We're commanded to eat and drink from that which is halal, not from that which is haram. And we'll see the effects of it not just in ourselves, but in the barakah of our families. Right, so Imam al-Nawawi, his laqab is Nawawi, right? His name is Yahya, but we call him Nawawi. Why? Because he comes from a place called Nawa, which is where? Syria, right? And so he came from a place called Nawa. So, and a person that comes from Nawa, you would linguistically call him Nawawi, right? But the scholars of language, they say, to make it easier, just call him Nawawi, right? So that's one thing. So Imam al-Nawawi, he was born in 631 and he lived for 45 years. And within 45 years, he accomplished so much within the Islamic scholarship tradition, right? The scholars, they added up the amount of pages that he had to have written. If he had started writing at the age of 18 and he died when he was 45, he would have had to write 40 pages every single day of his life in order for him to have authored how much he has authored. That's insane. Imagine from the day you turn 18 to the time you die at 45, you write 40 pages a day. That's how much Imam al-Nawawi wrote. Right? So Imam al-Nawawi, when he was a kid, he was a very serious child. He stood out from the crowd. He stood out from the rest of the kids. There's a story that of Imam al-Nawawi as a child that, there were kids playing, and I'll just give an example. Imagine, there's two soccer teams playing outside of Mesquite Youth, and they have two teams of 5, but they only have 4 and 5. And they're like, Yahya, come play with us, come play with us. He's like, no, I don't want to play. He's just sitting there. He's just, he's thinking. He's in his thought process. And they're like, no, come on, play with us. We need one more person. And you know what he got angry and he said, "Ma khuliqtu li hada." He said, I wasn't created for this. And that's and his Hifz al-Quran teacher made note of that as well. And Imam al-Nawawi, he memorized the Quran before he even turned before puberty, before bulugh. That's how special he was. And his Hifz al-Quran teacher noticed that of Imam al-Nawawi, so he told his father and he said that, look, you're gonna have to send him off to study in Damascus because he won't be able to grow here in Nawa, right? But the thing is, Imam al-Nawawi's father, Sharaf, he needed Yahya, he needed his son Yahya because he was the eldest child. And you know how it is with rizq and kasb and whatnot. He needed his son's help so that he could manage his household. And so Imam al-Nawawi didn't go. And many of the scholars say that that's why he had barakah in his ilm. Yes, he could have gone earlier and gotten a head start, but because he didn't and he stayed obedient to his father, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put even more barakah in his knowledge. So Imam al-Nawawi at the age of 18, so what, he memorized Quran before bulugh. At the age of 18, he traveled to Damascus to study in Madrasa Rawahiyya, right? And describing his time studying there, of the 6 years that he studied there, Imam al-Nawawi also, he traveled to Hijaz as well, Medina and Makkah to study. But out of the 6 years that he studied there, describing that time, he said that I would study 12 hours a day. 12 hours a day, and each hour was dedicated to a different lesson, a different ilm, to a different fun. And for 2 of those years, not once did this side of me ever lay on the side of a bed. I would always fall asleep while studying because it would just take over me. That's how dedicated Imam al-Nawawi was to his studies. That's how he reached the status that he reached. And Imam al-Nawawi, some of the scholars, they say they take some points that we can apply to our own lives of Imam al-Nawawi's life. How did he reach that level of scholarship? How did he reach that level of scholarship? They mentioned some points that we can all apply. The first one is that he traveled for ilm. He traveled for the sake of knowledge. The ayat that I read in the second rak'ah is about traveling for the sake of knowledge. He traveled all the way from Damascus, from Noah to Damascus, and he also traveled to Hijaz. Can you guys name me some benefits of traveling for the sake of seeking knowledge? Anything. What does it show? When a person travels to gain something, what does that show about that person? That they really want it, right? It shows their sacrifice. It shows their commitment. What else? What does it show? Intelligence, yeah. But what does it show about that person who's willing to travel all the way for the sake of knowledge? Huh? Ikhlas. It shows their sincerity. It shows the fact that this person is willing to leave back his family, willing to leave back the comforts around being his parents and his family and everyone that he grew up around just for the sake of seeking knowledge. It shows that person's commitment, right? And number two, one of the things that we can learn about Imam al-Nawawi and his pursuit of seeking knowledge is that he went to a well-known institution. He went to a well-known madrasa rawahiyya. So if you want to study and we want to learn, we learn from reliable sources. We learn from people with isnad, right? The Prophet ﷺ, he says in a hadith, فَانْظُرْ عَمَّنْ تَأْخُذُونَ دِينَكُمْ. Be careful with who you take your religion from. We have so many jami'at now in the Arab world, and sadly we don't have that available for us in America yet. I mean, we're working on it, but it's not there at that level, right? We have Jami'at al-Azhar, we have Diyar al-Ulum in Pakistan and in Hind, we have the Mahadra that are in Mauritania, we have Jami'at al-Islamiyya bil Madinat al-Munawwara, and we have al-Qur'an in Mecca, right? So people have had to travel all the way to these places so that they can study knowledge and come back to teach their people, right? So we have to be careful where we take our knowledge from, people of Islam. And then one of the other things that we can note that makes Imam al-Nawawi stand out from the rest of the scholars was his dedication to his studies. Imam al-Nawawi was so dedicated to his studies that when guests would come to his house, you know how his room was? His room was full of books lying around everywhere. And he didn't have bookshelves, the luxury of having bookshelves, nice decorative bookshelves. They were just all over the floor. And there was no place for anybody else to sit except himself. So, when a person comes and tries to visit him, he's not going to go asub al-qahwa, a'tik al-tamar, They didn't have time for that. There was just one spot, and that was for Imam al-Nawawi to sit. So they knew they had to say what they had to say and leave, right? And another thing is that when people would come to visit him, he would be so keen on making use of every minute of his time, is that he would use that as an opportunity to sharpen all of his pencils. He would use that, he would use that time to prepare for his next study lesson. That's how dedicated he was. And another thing that we can learn from Imam al-Nawawi that made him stand out from the rest is that he studied with many scholars. He was a polymath. He wasn't just great at one science. He was great at all of the sciences. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran about the Nahl, ثُمَّ كُلِي مِن كُلِّ الثَّمَرَاتِ. That the Nahl, the bee, it eats from كُلِّ الثَّمَرَاتِ فَاسْلُكِي سُبُلَ رَبِّكِ ذُلَّا يَخْرُجُ مِن بُطُونِهَا شَرَابٌ مُخْتَلِفٌ أَلْوَانُهَا فِيهِ شِفَاءٌ لِلنَّاسِ. It eats from all of the thamarat, and then it comes out with honey that has shifa for people. And just like that, if you want to be a person that could truly benefit people and have shifa for other people, you take from all of the thamarat. You take from all of the scholars. You take from all of the resources you have access to. Not just one of them. You make use of all of the avenues that you have. And that's what made Imam al-Nawawi stand out. And one other thing that made Imam al-Nawawi stand out was his extremely strong memory. He was capable of memorizing things very quickly. He memorized the Quran, Qabl al-Bulugh, and he memorized many books of the Shafi'i madhab and ahadith probably in the thousands, And one of his books is actually a sharh of Sahih Muslim, Minhaj. And Imam al-Nawawi, one other thing that made him stand out was the greatness of his own teachers. His teachers were great. When you have great teachers, you end up becoming a great student. When we look at the likes of Ibn Taymiyyah, we see that he had students like Ibn Kathir and Ibn Rajab. When we look at the likes of Imam al-Ghazali, what came after the generation of Imam al-Ghazali? Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. That's the type of person that came out from the teachings of Imam al-Ghazali. And even Imam al-Nawawi had a great student himself, Ibn Ata, that became a great scholar. And one other thing that made Imam al-Nawawi stand out from the rest of the scholars is that he loved to write and he loved to teach. Anytime he would learn something, he wouldn't just let it sit there. No, he would always write it down and try to keep it to memory and then make an effort to teach it to others. Because as soon as you teach it to someone else, it sticks in your head more than if you just let it sit and pass by. And Imam al-Nawawi was also known to be an aesthetic. He wasn't just a scholar, but he was also an aesthetic. Someone who was unattached to the dunya. So much so that, imagine, he died without getting married. He died at the age of 45 without ever getting married. And you know why? Because he simply did not have the time. He didn't have the time to dedicate to getting married. And he knew that if he were to do the sunnah of getting married, then he would fall into the haram of not giving his wife her right? So Imam al-Nawawi was, abstained from the pleasures of this dunya for the sake of seeking knowledge and teaching it. And Imam al-Nawawi was such a zahid that he wouldn't even eat from the fruits of Damascus. You know why? Because in the Khilafah of Umar radiallahu anhu, they had many awqaf that were established. And the thing is, over time, people forgot who those awqaf belonged to. This waqf went to this family, this waqf went to this set of fuqara. Nobody knew, because over time they just had forgotten. So because of that, in fiqh, you would technically be allowed to eat from it, but out of his taqwa, he refrained from eating from those awqaf. And he would only eat from the fruits when they would come from his parents in Noah, right? So that was the type of person Imam al-Nawawi was. Now I'm going to explain the third hadith of Arba'in al-Nawawiyah, and we're going to end there, inshallah. It's narrated by Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu. Who's Abdullah ibn Umar? Sahabi, yeah, of course, but Abdullah ibn Umar man? Ibn al-Khattab, the son of Umar ibn al-Khattab, and he was a great scholar. Abdullah ibn Umar was a great faqih and a great scholar, right? From amongst the Sahaba. Because not every Sahabi was a scholar, right? Abdullah ibn Umar was one of the scholars. So he narrates this hadith and he says that the Prophet ﷺ, he says in this hadith, بُنِيَ الْإِسْلَامُ عَلَى خَمْسٍ, that Islam is built upon 5 things. A building has pillars, right? Just like that, imagine Islam as like a building or like a tent, and the tent is built upon 5 pillars. بُنِيَ الْإِسْلَامُ عَلَى خَمْسٍ, شَهَادَةَ أَن لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَأَنَّ مُحَمَّدًا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ. And the second one, وَإِقَامِ الصَّلَاةِ. The third one, وَإِيتَاءِ الزَّكَاةِ. In this hadith, actually, وَحَجْ الْبَيْتِ comes first. Usually the order is وَصَوْمُ Ramadan, but in this hadith, وَحَجْ الْبَيْتِ came, and then وَصَوْمُ Ramadan, right? The scholars mention some reasons, I'm not going to get into that, right? So 5 things. 5 things that Islam is built upon. So notice, the Prophet ﷺ didn't say that Islam khams, that Islam is 5 things. No, he said Islam is built upon 5 things. Because just like a building, right, it doesn't just have its pillars, it doesn't just have its foundation. It has beautiful glass windows, it has, it has carpet, it has a minbar, it has all of these beautiful things, just like that. Islam isn't just these 5 things. These are the 5 minimal things. But it's also birrul walidain, it's also having husnul khuluq, it's also tahajjud, it's also all of these things, right? But these 5 things the Prophet ﷺ mentions that Islam is built upon. First one? What is it? Shahadat la ilaha illallah wa Muhammadur Rasulullah. The shahada, right? Testimony of faith. To believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only deity worthy of worship and that Muhammad is his final messenger. And the second one, Yazid. Wa iqam as-salah, right? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, notice that He never just says as-salah. He doesn't say in the Quran, salu. He says, aqimu as-salah. Right? Because it's to establish prayer. And we can have a whole muhadara just of salah. And I'm not going to go into the detail of it. Ahmed did the other day. Right? And just know that the Prophet ﷺ had, salah is so important that he went all the way to Mi'raj. He went all the way to the heavens to learn about salah, right? To receive salah. And then, وَإِيتَاءِ الزَّكَاةِ, and giving zakat. Do you guys know what zakat is?
Yes, charity.
Charity. But it's obligatory. There's charity that you give out of your good nature, but then there's charity that you have to give as a Muslim yearly if you reach a specific amount of wealth and you pass the age of puberty, right? Was zakat, and then وحج البيت and Hajj, the greater pilgrimage that we all have to do if we're capable of once a year, once in a lifetime. And the last thing, fasting in Ramadan, right? And that ends the hadith and that ends the lesson. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم.